Yeah! Hey, this is Ashley and you guys are watching Ashley Dominique, and this is going to be my first book review for this channel. We have old book reviews, but those shall never be spoken of again on a channel that shall remain unknown. So today, for my very first book review on this brand new channel, I will be talking about the lovely The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. And as you might be able to tell from the way that I'm even introing this book, I did end up liking it quite a bit. So let's get into the spoiler-free details and talk about this book. So, The Cruel Prince, the details. It is written by Holly Black. It was released in January of 2018, which is earlier this year. Yeah, I'm late to it. Shh, don't mind me. This is a YA fantasy about fairies. So just a tiny bit about the story so you can get an idea of what it's about. It is about a girl named Jude who is mortal and is from our world. However, when she was roughly 7 years old, a fairy came into her house and killed both her mother and her father right in front of her. And because of this, she ended up being whisked away to Fairy, where she was raised for the next 10 years. There, Jude became heavily accustomed to living in Fairy, so much to the point that the human world seems like something that is completely foreign to her. And don't be afraid, Jude is not entirely alone. She does have an identical twin who is also mortal that was taken with her to Fairy, as well as an older half-sister, Vivi, who is actually half fairy, which is a large part of the reason why Jude is there in the first place. Either way, Jude is now in Fairy and 17 years old, and she's trying to find a way and a place within Fairy now that she's getting older. And one of the ways that Jude can become a part of Fairy properly is to be a warrior, to be a knight of Fairy, and to earn her keep and earn her place by earning the favor of one of the high gentry positions within the Fairy courts. And that is pretty much where the story begins. It's with Jude trying to find her place, as well as her sister Taryn trying to find a way to secure their own places within Fairy, because going back to the human world just isn't something that they can do at this point. So, now that I've given you just a little bit of the backstory, and no, don't worry, I didn't spoil anything heavily, you might be wondering, hey, where's this Cruel Prince from the title? Well, he's introduced very early on, and he is one of the princes of the High Court, and he ends up having a lot of interactions with Jude and her sister Taryn, and he is a very interesting character, which I will go into more in the spoiler bit. But for now, my general thoughts on the story, and they are, so The Cruel Prince overall is the kind of book that drew me in. Within the first few pages, it was the writing that actually hit the spot for me. I was drawn in and I didn't want to put it down. The way that Holly Black writes is just, there's this way that she sweeps you up and it's kind of mystical. Holly Black's way of writing was what drew me in, but overall it was the characters and what was going on in the story that really kept me there. So for me, I'm a little bit skeptical when I go into fairy stories. Fairies are not particularly my favorite, and while I can come to love a fairy story, they just have to work a little bit harder than other stories, and that was the case for this one as well. I needed a little bit more persuasion, but thankfully the characters in the story actually were engaging enough and interesting enough that I really enjoyed it. Jude is the kind of protagonist that is headstrong, but she also recognizes and acknowledges her flaws. So even when she fails, you still want to root for her because she's acknowledging what she messed up and she's not just completely blind like some protagonists are. So that was one of the things that I really enjoyed about Jude. But all of the characters were really interesting, and also the fact that everything was portrayed, the relationships between the characters, as though they weren't as simple as one would think. So with a lot of stories, you have a basic relationship, and that's just how it is. There isn't a whole lot of fluctuation. There's not a lot of intricacy within that relationship. It's cut and dry how a character should feel with how they actually do feel. Sometimes you get a big twist and you find out that something's actually majorly different, but for the most part, it is how you think it is. And that's a little bit different here. Really, as I was reading this story, I realized that while Taryn and Jude and Vivi and Maddox and even Carden, they all had very interesting relationships with each other, the way that they were evolving and how they actually regarded each other were actually extremely complex, and they weren't just very cut and dry, this is the relationship that this person has with the other. So I really found that interesting. And that is all I'm going to really say about the story right now. I did really enjoy the story. Where it ended was a wonderful spot. I felt like it was very good. There were some predictable bits, but something being predictable isn't necessarily bad. If it's executed well, it's still really interesting. And I did really enjoy the story, and ultimately I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, solid 4 out of 5. Not a little bit higher, not a bit lower, just 4 out of 5. I really enjoy it. I'm really looking forward to the next installment. I can't wait. But yeah, let me go ahead and get into a little bit of spoilers. So if you have not read the book or you don't want to be spoiled, go ahead, check out, go ahead and make sure that you subscribe to my channel and like the video and let me know what you thought, or if you're interested in checking out the books down below, or if there's anything that you think I should check out in the future and possibly review. I'm getting back into this, so let me know in the comments down below, and I'm going to go ahead and jump into some spoilers. So as for the spoiler talk, I'm not going to go on for too long because there's not a whole lot that I really want to delve and disclose too much, but I do want to speak a little bit about a couple of different relationships in the story. So as I mentioned previously, there's some really complex relationships, and one of the really interesting ones that there existed was the relationship between Jude and Mack. And as I mentioned previously, and if you've read the story, Jude is mortal. Maddox is a fairy. Maddox is the man who killed both of her parents in front of Jude. And he's the person who took her and her sisters off to Fairy. Yet, because of the fact that he once loved her mother, he took them in and cared for them as his own. He treats them like his own daughters. And you see that, and you see that Jude even understands how much Maddox actually loves her. And so you have this relationship of a girl and this adoptive father, and she knows exactly what he did, yet they still love each other, which is very interesting because in most situations, in most books, I feel like they wouldn't take that time to establish the fact that, hey, 10 years has passed, things have evolved, he's proved to care for her and treat her like an actual daughter. And she's come to understand the ways of his world, that what he did to her mother was something that was considered just in the eyes of the society that he came from. It wasn't some sort of Stockholm syndrome in any sense. It was this different, complex relationship. And while you could argue in a sense that it is a little bit Stockholmy, there's also there's something different, because at any time she really could have left. She could have changed her station, but she doesn't. She tries to rise up to the situation that she's been put in. And she doesn't accept blanketly. And while she does love Maddox, she also realizes his flaws. And that comes to a head, especially at the end of the book, when she realizes that really he just wants to hold the crown himself, and that he wants to go to war, and he wants to be the one in control. And rather than helping this man that she admits over and over again that she both loves and hates, which is completely reasonable, instead of helping him, she, in the process of trying to protect a brother that technically isn't her own, but she loves him like a brother because for all intents and purposes, he is a brother. She was raised with him. that she doesn't help him. She is out there to help protect who she views as family. And in this case, that is Oak, the little boy raised as her brother. Also, while I'm talking about Oak, let's just talk briefly about that ending, because that ending, yes. So, like I mentioned before, some of the twists were very predictable to me. So, for example, earlier in the story, when we hit the midpoint, when we were at the coronation, I didn't expect Dane to die. However, the second that the situation arose, that the coronation was beginning, something did seem off, the way things were set up. Jude noticed this as well. She figured out that he was going to die a little bit after I figured it out while I was reading it. But still, Dane dies. And things start to crumble around Jude, essentially. And as that happens, I'm just like, well, this event is predictable. I kind of saw this coming. I mean, he puts this Gios on her that only he can take off. So I feel like in order for Jude to grow, something has to happen to Dane. I didn't immediately know that it would just be that he was going to be flat out killed at the coronation, though I figured it out before he actually died at the coronation. But it felt relatively predictable. On the other hand, you have the Oak situation that happens at the end, where instead of Carden crowning Oak, Oak ends up crowning Carden. That is the one that I didn't quite expect for it to happen. I really did expect for Oak to be the one with the crown and everything, and actually whisked away in this grand plan. The way that the book was set up, it was set up in a way that I actually kind of believed that that was going to happen, because usually what happens with books, you get a plan that gets set up, and the less you know of what is going to happen to the plan, generally that is going to be how the plan plays out. And in this case, we didn't really know what was going to happen except for the end goal. So I very much expected some bits of the plan to go heavily awry, but the goal to be accomplished. What we ended up getting was the goal, the actual plan, since we didn't know much about it, was actually executed pretty much how they expected, which is a little bit different than I'm used to in stories. I'm used to things going wrong. In this case, things went the way that they wanted it to. And that was a really cool play on my expectations that I've been trained to think on. So the fact that Carden is now on the throne is a very interesting prospect. Also in the fact that Carden has a very interesting relationship with Jude. One of the things that I never really understood in the story was why Carden was given this such terrible reputation as being such an awful person, because while yes, Carden was a little bit of a drunk and he could be a little bit of a jerk sometimes, he was never intentionally truly cruel like the other people in his group. And I noticed that very, very early on. It was always the other people that were doing terrible things, and Carden simply watched on, almost amused, just allowing it to happen, encouraging and letting things happen out, but never actually playing the hand. And if he saw things going too far, he would actually stop things or turn their direction. So that was the one thing that I noticed about Carden very early on, was that he wasn't actually as terrible as he seemed, and that mood definitely increased as we started to see more and more of him as the story grew on later on. And I'm really interested to see how this 1 year of servitude will end up playing out, because really at this point we need the relationship between Carden and Jude to grow. Jude needs to realize that Carden isn't as terrible, and Carden needs to realize that Jude can be a major asset to him. And it's going to be interesting to see how things grow, because they can't just bring Oak back just yet. So Jude has to find a way to make the situation with Carden work. And I'm curious to see how everything is going to play out in the next book. I really wish I had the next book already, but unfortunately I don't. I'm not going to talk much about Jude and Taryn. I didn't particularly like Taryn very much. she was very focused on being part of the fairy, and she didn't really care much about who she hurt in the process. So I lost a lot of sympathy for her very quickly. And I just didn't find her a particularly interesting character, and I didn't really like her that much. But if you guys like this book, please let me know in the comments down below. And if you'd like to see more from me, please make sure that you like, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you guys next time. Bye.